Hello. I want to introduce our guests today. It's Larisu Babій and Lana Найленд, right? And both are dancers, and both are re-emigrants. Yeah. Larissa came to Ukraine again, I would say, 15 years ago. And since then, she has been a member of Dance Laboratorium group, and also she is a teacher in Feldenkrais method. And I would like you to tell a little bit more about your pre-war activities, Larissa, if I may.
Pre-war, long time ago.
Yeah.
I have consistently worked as a translator for over 15 years, I think all the time I've been in Ukraine. And that has allowed me to be deeply connected with the contemporary art world and the experimental theater world, where I have worked not only as a translator, but also as an organizer of art exhibitions and performance-related events, including performances in the National Art Museum of Ukraine and discussions related to art that kind of provokes people to think. And then more recently, yes, I've been teaching awareness through movement, which is a somatic practice from the Feldenkrais method. And that's something that I hope to continue in the near future with Ukrainians, and especially Ukrainian soldiers who have been through traumatic experiences in war.
Okay, thank you a lot. And Lana, the fact that I know about you are that you were dancing in Virsky collective, yeah? And then you owned also a shop for dancers. If you want to add something, please, I would be happy.
So I arrived to Ukraine not quite 20 years ago. Yes, you're right. I danced with Virsky National Ensemble for a number of those initial years. And then I moved on to some business-related work, one of which was What's on Kyiv. So it's an English language culture and entertainment magazine, which we had to close due to the revolution in 2014. But then that led to different opportunities. And yes, you're right again, one of which is Postmark Ukraine. We make Ukrainian dance costumes, dance footwear, studio wear, as well as an academy, a dance academy called Rodovid, Academy of Ukrainian Dance. And we work a lot with dancers, not just we work with dancers in Ukraine, of course, but not only across Canada and the US. And we're in the process of pulling together a curriculum program for specifically Ukrainian national dance.
Okay, thank you. Since we spoke the last time, a lot of things have changed, and for the moment you were volunteering. Larissa mainly in Mykolaiv, and Lana, you in the eastern Ukraine, and we would hear about it a little bit more again.
Maybe you'll start, Lana.
Sure. Okay. So in February of this year, I was in my apartment in Kyiv, actually, and I recognized that something was going to happen, and I wasn't sure what, but I needed to do something rather than sort of sit in this constant worry and fear. And so what ended up happening was on 28th of February, I decided to start a fund. The name of the fund is Ukrainian Patriot. And since then, we have been able to register in Canada, the US, as well as Ukraine. We have volunteers. It's a volunteer organization, 100%. And we have volunteers across the world, as well as here in Ukraine. Aid is either purchased from our side or it's donated to us. And we take it basically with boots on the ground to those in need, whether that's in Kharkiv Oblast, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and we will be heading further south in the next few weeks.
Okay. Larissa, and you?
And for my part, I also began this long, strange journey since February 24th in my home in Kyiv. And I quickly fled, and I ended up in Lviv, and I lived there for several months working with an organization that brings medical supplies into Ukraine from abroad to help hospitals in need and also units on the front line. And through that work, providing more like humanitarian aid and support, basically helping people survive the effects of the war, it made me realize that the best way to help people is to end the war more quickly so that less people are injured and forced to leave their homes and recover. So by the summer, I got involved with supporting a military unit in southern Ukraine. And this military unit is mostly using, developing different technologies to help Ukraine fight more effectively and essentially fight smarter. I think we've all seen this over the course of the war, that the Ukrainian army is hugely outnumbered by Russia's and has far less equipment and weapons, but we are doing so well because we're using our intelligence, and a lot of people are doing that. So I've been helping fundraise for an organization called Heroes for Ukraine. And what they've done since we last spoken, over the past about 3 months, a team of soldiers and volunteer engineers have basically developed several models of drones that can be used fighting on the front. They've basically developed them from scratch. And so right now they're testing those drones. And one of the uses for these drones is actually to send leaflets over the front line into Russian territory. And these leaflets basically have text in Russian encouraging soldiers to surrender. In that sense, save their lives by putting down their weapons and surrendering to the Ukrainian armed forces before we have to kill them.
You could easily take the decision not to stay in Ukraine, yeah, and it could be estimated as a really brave decision to stay. But I would ask these maybe simple and two direct questions: why?
The primary reason is there's no way you can avoid the war. I did spend a few weeks in the United States at the end of the summer, and basically it was like I had left my heart in Ukraine and my body was in the US, and that was very uncomfortable because the fact of the matter is also that I've lived here for 17 years and it's been, you know, most of my adult life here, and I've really invested myself in this place and these people, and you become part of a place. You can't just, how to say, to tear a person away from their place and their communities is a very, very violent act. And even as long as I am in a place that my apartment is intact and I am physically okay, I don't want to leave, but I want to do everything in my power to keep making this place possible to live in. And I see that millions of Ukrainians are doing the same thing.
Okay. Thank you, Lana.
I think that that's a sentiment that I echo as well. And I had, I'm Canadian by birth, but I had the opportunity, have had the opportunity to spend the last almost 20 years here. And I also will say that Ukraine has become home in this time, first and foremost. With that said, I also, despite the fact that I actually have no Ukrainian heritage or background whatsoever, I feel more Ukrainian today than I do Canadian. My place here is just as Larissa has suggested. This is my home, and alongside millions of Ukrainians who have decided to stay, to remain, I stand. And it is not just for the future of Ukrainians. It's not just for the future of Ukraine or even the world. It's also for my own future, to understand that I have a place in this world that may not be the same place that I was born, but that deserves to be free and united and stable and supported, no matter what's happening, no matter who is trying to destabilize this country. And so all of my efforts in the last almost 8 months now have been directed to ensuring that that happens, that there is a stable future for Ukraine abroad. Because I do recognize that if, and I don't even want to say if, but if Ukraine falls, then this continues. It doesn't end here in Ukraine. It continues into Europe and potentially, onward and further. So that's why I'm here, and this is why I have not left.
Okay, thank you a lot for your answers. How can you estimate maybe either any change of perception of Ukraine by people from USA and from Canada? And what is this perception, and if it changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion? I mean, since 24th of February.
I know for a fact that the first 3 months of what was happening here, the entire world, very nearly, was extremely united, and not only aid, but moral, physical, and governmental support was coming in from all corners. That most certainly has declined since the summer, and even into the new season now, as we move into fall and into autumn. The amount of aid and even attention to actually what's happening here has really severely declined. That's not to say that people don't care, but there is an amount of fatigue that's happening outside of Ukraine. That's going to be a problem moving forward, and certainly moving into the winter months, when the cold weather and temperatures below zero are going to severely affect our ability to move. It's disappointing, but it's a reality, and it's one that we here in Ukraine have to ensure that we stay on top of, really. And in terms of, and what do I mean by that? I mean in terms of making sure that not just support in terms of items in hand are coming in, but that there is discussion and that there is constant attention paid to what is happening here for future decisions and regulations and legal consequences that will need to be considered.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, I talk primarily with people from the United States. So, as far as Americans are concerned, I've actually found that I feel like people are actually starting to get an idea that this war is actually serious. Even if there was kind of a big outpouring of generosity in the first few months, that was more of like a reaction. And as the war has dragged on, and as people have seen Ukrainians continue to persevere for more than half a year, not give up ground, but on the opposite, actually starting to gain ground and regain territories from Russian occupation. On the one hand, on the other hand, they're kind of seeing how Russia's actions just become, God, I don't even know what the word is, pitiful, cowardly, gruesome, to send, 84 missiles into civilian targets all over Ukraine in one day. I do feel like the situation is evolving in a way that, even just individual Americans that I talk to, they're in awe and very impressed with the heroism of Ukrainians. I think the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges, is also just to kind of continue to build that bridge to remind them that this is their war also. It's not just something that you're watching on the television where like, oh yay, you know, our good Ukrainians are winning today. It really is their war, and it's their responsibility, and the losses of Ukrainian lives are also related to what they do and don't do.
Can you observe any changes inside the Ukrainian society?
I would say that Ukrainians, perhaps on an individual level even, and as a society, and as a political body, are growing up. We even see this in the sort of the difference. I think there was a degree of kind of like flashback when Kyiv was struck by missiles, the center of Kyiv was struck by missiles on Monday, kind of echo of February 24th. It's not that we were calm and accepting of this, but there was like no panic. I mean, in the sense that, okay, we're learning, we've been living in war for 8 months, and I don't mean to say that we're becoming like complacent and used to it, but you do learn to keep your spirit up under really stressful situations, and you learn to not be kind of, you know, like blown over by fear the way you could be by a gust of wind. And that's showing. I feel like, you know, Ukrainians are becoming stronger and harder and clearer in their intention. We also saw this in, like, say, when President Zelensky spoke on August 24th, and he very clearly spoke from himself as the president of Ukraine and basically expressed the will of the people that we are going to take back all of our territories, including Crimea.
It's fascinating watching how the different former Soviet states have in essence grown up, and Ukraine is no different in that regard. I have lived through 2 revolutions and now a continued war. And through each, you see a new stage within the country and the way its people interact with each other, but also with the international world following those events. Certainly following Euromaidan in 2014, we recognized that where Ukrainians and anyone actually coming out of the Soviet Empire, where they relied on the state for their livelihood, for their well-being, that was no longer the case following the revolution in 2014. And the younger generations were taking responsibility for their lives and coming up with these incredibly amazing ideas, not just for the benefit of themselves, but for the benefit of the country. And this is absolutely something that we're seeing here and now. And associated with Monday's attacks was absolutely this idea of a determined strength that maybe wasn't there in February, but absolutely appeared this week. And psychologically, if we look at it from a different angle, when we understand what's ahead of us, we are prepared in a way that we aren't necessarily if we're presented with something the first time. That's what happened in February, and we weren't prepared. We weren't ready. We had no idea what was coming. We absolutely know what's happening now. And with every Ukrainian who returns back to the country, that is more and more evident. We are ready, we are prepared, and it's not even, we're not waiting anymore for an attack, we're actually fighting back.
Will the war change our cultural landscape, and how? I mean, the case with Dovzhenko Center, it just is an illustration of some negative scenarios that can be happening. What do you think?
From my side, anything is possible, first of all. The decision, however, is up to the people. And if the choice is to be apathetic, then yes, there can absolutely be negative consequences. If the choice is to be proactive and understand that you have far more power than what you've been told, whether that's from the state or from your teachers or even from your parents, then there isn't anything you can't do. And I believe that the Ukrainian people have understood that in a way that they never, ever thought about themselves before. And so moving forward, what the future looks like for Ukraine is absolutely up to Ukrainians. It's not up to the politicians at this point. It's up to the people who are here and on the ground and who have stayed and will continue to rebuild this country into a greater place than it ever has been before.
I support that sentiment. I think if one is to look more towards the what is traditionally thought of as culture, as the arts and cinema, dance, theater, etc. A lot of those cultural institutions, there were attempts, actually a lot of efforts were put into reforming them even, before 2014 and really intensely, around 2014, 2015. And they didn't bear much fruit, in my opinion. Where I have been putting my attention and looking for culture is similarly to what Lana said, is kind of more like literally on the ground, the people who are doing things to keep the country alive right now, be they the millions, not millions, but huge number of volunteer organizations, small organizations. They're almost all pretty small and very person-to-person, network-oriented. There's a culture in how we work together, even if we're figuring it out as we go along, but as you kind of build those connections, as you learn how to communicate with other people who are really different from you, but you need to help immediately. Like all of those sort of personal transformations and person-to-person transformations, that's also a culture. I've been fascinated by the Ukrainian military because they're doing so well in fighting. What kind of culture is there? And I've been really surprised to see a lot of, personal initiative kind of between, or, kind of taking advantage of the fact that the bureaucratic system is kind of in chaos and not everything is aligned and it's intentionally not hierarchical these days. How people are, again, finding their own power and being able to use their own power and talents to do something that is vitally important to the country. I would like to hope that that spirit and those skills that have been learned surviving in a war will continue to thrive and will continue to find ways to use what we've learned in this time of hardship to keep building our country and rebuilding it in a way that can really kind of reflect Ukraine's spirit going on.
Okay, thank you. And from your experience of communicating with people all around the world, maybe not only America, but also from Europe and so on, what is the image of Ukrainian culture by those people, or by foreigners?
From my side, what I can say is that Canada has the largest diaspora in the world, just behind Russia, and potentially not even anymore. Potentially it is now the largest diaspora population. And so Canadians, for their part, see Ukrainians as very hardworking people with a beautiful culture. They make excellent food, great vodka, and dance their butts off. That's the way that Canadians see Ukraine. And there are many who are looking forward very much to returning to the country that they know so well.
Okay, thank you.
I could add that in the summer, I read an article by an American journalist, George Packer, in The Atlantic. And it was a very long article. He came and visited Ukraine and And he did look at this sort of, especially the Ukrainian volunteer efforts, this idea of samoorganizatsiya, which he literally translated as self-organization. Other thing that I get maybe from the people who I talk to abroad is I think they do see Ukrainians, especially Americans, I think they see a kind of heroism in Ukraine's defense. And on the one hand, it's flattering. On the other hand, I find it a little bit frustrating because when you look at somebody else as a hero, you kind of label somebody else a hero, and then you just kind of can sit and watch them and be like, wow, they're so heroic. Whereas I think really what makes a person a hero is when they're not thinking about, am I a hero? Am I an idiot? Like, I see the situation, I feel this in my gut, and I need to do it, and I need to do it now. But maybe the more people start to kind of...
Okay, and maybe the last question, what are your plans for the nearest future here? And yeah.
The one thing I forgot to mention this entire conversation is that since the beginning of March, basically since fleeing my home in Kyiv, I have been keeping a record of my life moving around Ukraine and a little bit around the world on Substack, and it's called A Kind of Refugee. And I've been writing about both what happens to me in Ukraine in wartime as it unfolds, because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow ever, and reflecting on that in relation to my personal heritage. How did I end up in Ukraine? Because all of my grandparents were Ukrainian and fled Ukraine in 1943 and brought me up in the Ukrainian diaspora, and I came back here. And so this wartime experience that I'm living on my own skin and on my own body has also really opened up a lot of insights into the stories that I've heard about World War II and, you know, what kind of this historical heritage that I carry with me. So I will continue writing about whatever happens in online, and continue supporting the volunteer organization, or the organizations that support the Ukrainian military, Heroes for Ukraine, and my friends in Lviv, community self-help, and whatever else crosses my path.
Okay.
That's a good question. What will my future look like? I don't know. And I'll echo Larissa's sentiment in that we don't know what tomorrow looks like, and so we can only really plan for today. What I would like to say is that we will continue. So Ukrainian Patriot has acquired and continues to build its team internationally as well as here in Ukraine. We have a small fleet of vehicles that are here and on the ground in the country, and we continue to either bring in or are presented with donations of humanitarian for both human and animal, medical, as well as protective gear for anyone who has decided to remain here in Ukraine, and that includes civilian, volunteer or military. I've made a number of trips to the front myself, and there will be, you know, God's willing, a number yet to come, and we have one that is planned for next week in a couple of our vehicles, which will be packed to the brim, and inshallah that we will make it to where we need to go, and pass really necessary items, you know, everyday items, food, water, sleeping bags, winter gear, because winter is coming, and all of the emotion that entails, so that we can help keep the communities that we support as safe and as supported as possible.